With Amex Platinum, you can enjoy access to dedicated card member entrances at select events because skipping the line makes you the star of game day. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/withAmex. Card member entrance access not limited to Amex Platinum Card.
I'm not going back to college to be your friend. I'm going so I can get Uber One for students. It saves you on Uber and Uber Eats. I'm there for $0 delivery fee on cheeseburgers, up to 10% off smoothies, and 6% Uber cash back on rides. Just to be clear, I'm there for savings, not whatever you think college is for.
Get Uber One for students, a membership to save on Uber and Uber Eats. With deals this good, everyone wants to be a student. Join for just $4.99 a month. Savings may vary. Eligibility and member terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate is the world's biggest coffee lover because we love all the ways you enjoy. Wait. Coffee Mate can't love coffee more than me. I'm a foodie. I went to Kyoto just for a nitro matcha latte. What? Oh, I have to finish the ad. Coffee Mate, for the love of coffee.
Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson and welcome back to Sportly. This week, I'm so excited to have our first athlete and our second academic on the podcast, former NCAA Division I player and renowned scholar, Dr. Nefertiti Walker. Dr. Walker is a prominent figure in organizational culture research. She's known for her extensive research and practical applications in the field, and particularly for her studies on sports and gender. She is the Deputy Vice President for Academic Affairs, Student Affairs, and Equity at the University of Massachusetts. As a social scientist, she focuses on examining inclusion and exclusion to understand the experiences of marginalized identities and design more inclusive environments. She is a research fellow with the North American Society for Sport Management, placing her among the top 10% of researchers in her field. And she is, as I mentioned, a former NCAA Division I basketball player at Georgia Tech and Stetson University. She served as a coach and was inducted into the Stetson University Hall of Fame. That's super cool. She is also the co-author, most recently, of the new book with David Barry. The book is called Slaying the Trolls, While the Trolls Are Very, Very Wrong About Women and Sports. Dr. Walker, Neff, thank you so much for joining us.
Kavitha, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence. So
thank you. We met, I want to say 10 years ago, probably at, I think, the ESPNW Summit.
Yes.
Which is a great event, obviously celebrating women in sports, and just the astronomical rise that we have seen that I think both you and I could have predicted 10 years ago, but that we have seen in the last couple of years has obviously been phenomenal. And now there couldn't really be a better time for this book of yours to have come out. So I'm so excited to talk to you about this. First of all, how are you doing? I'm talking to you after a long weekend. How's life?
Life is good. Life is good. I have a almost 2-year-old, so life is busy and hectic, but also very rewarding and a lot of fun.
Yeah. What is it like going through publishing a book? You're starting book tour stuff and events, I'm sure, with a 2-year-old.
Chaotic. Chaotic, but it forces you to manage your time. It's funny. Now my wife and I were constantly like, what did we do with all the time we had that we're now dedicating to her life, right? I mean, she sort of takes over our evenings and our weekends, and there's believe it or not, there is 2-year-old gym classes. And it's just like, what do we do? I feel like we should have been so much more productive.
Well, 2-year-old gym classes, is she a budding athlete?
We like to think so. You try not to project on kids, but she's pretty athletic. So it's fun to watch. It's, again, chaotic mess to watch 2-year-olds try to do a gym class, but it's a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. And I hope there are TikToks or something to come out of that.
Yeah, we need to do better at capturing it.
Well, so first of all, Neff, I want to go through just a little bit of your history. I gave a very, very top line intro for you at the beginning, but you grew up in Atlanta and you started playing basketball at 3 years old. And then you began your collegiate career at Georgia Tech in '01 before transferring to Stetson. Was basketball, if you began at 3 years old, was it always something that you thought you would do at such a high level in the collegiate years?
Absolutely not. When I say I started at 3, I started like going to the YMCA with my dad, right? It was just playing informal, not organized at all, pick up basketball and sort of being around basketball. My dad was a basketball fanatic. My family loves basketball. At family reunions, we always ended up, at the park for the fish fry around a basketball court. So it was very informal. I actually started playing formal organized basketball pretty late at the age of 11. And I was terrible. I was the last player off the bench. They put me in to run up and down and chase rebounds because I was tall for my age, even though I basically stopped growing in the 5th grade. So I was really, really bad. So to think back when I started playing organized basketball at the age of 11, would I have my jersey retired and number retired and be in Hall of Fame? It's absolutely not. I would not have thought that.
Yeah, we will absolutely get to that. I love that you said that you started at the ripe old age of 11, which is true though in youth sports if we think about it now. I'm curious though, when you were growing up and obviously your dad was very encouraging of you playing sports, were you ever made to feel that as a girl this was not an arena for you?
No, I think that's why I've taken to the research that I do. I think that's why writing this book was a lot of fun for me with Dave Barry. In my professional life and in my personal life and in my research life and really every aspect of my life, I've been an advocate for gender equity in sports because for me, I don't understand why it doesn't exist because I grew up playing with boys, against boys. I tell the story all the time of how my AAU team at the age of 11 or 12, we were playing against the boys and routinely beating the boys our same age. It was just normal for us. I mean, I know now, all the college teams scrimmage against guys, the women's teams at least, they scrimmage against guys, and it's become like a big part of how they prepare for the game. But we were playing against the boys because they were just the closest team to us and working out in the same gym and beating them. So I always saw myself as on par with men and boys and being able to do anything that they can do. And I was raised that way as well. So for me, I always found it very uncomfortable, unreasonable that women weren't treated equitably as far as resources are concerned, access, opportunities to boys and men when it comes to sports.
And it kind of hits you from both directions, right? Women and girls in sports are not given equity, not given the resources. But then when they do pass by to break through to the next level, I've talked to a ton of WNBA players when they're talking about equal pay or even equal facilities, equal training, that kind of thing. They always say, we're not trying to play the men. That's not what we're here to do. And that's often the criticism that some bad actors make in this. So it's interesting that you just kind of get it from all sides, no matter where you are in the women's sports space.
Absolutely. And, I call those purposely obtuse people, right? The ones that try to make the arguments where you're not as fast as LeBron or you're not as strong as this particular player. And first of all, I'm like, you're not either. So what are we talking about here? But I think also it's being purposely obtuse, right? They're different games, they're different sports. We've now seen that trying to sort of pink and shrink women's basketball to fit men's basketball doesn't work. We've seen that when you're intentional and respectful and authentic to the sport of women's basketball and you treat it as such and you support it as such and you finance it as such, it can really flourish. And that's why we're seeing women's basketball right now thrive because it's being treated as its own entity and it's being respected and promoted authentically. That's just how it has to be with sports. You have to treat them separately and differently.
And the game itself, people are finally paying attention to the actual hoop. And I know a ton of guys, I grew up in New York in the 90s. So smash mouth, physical Knicks basketball, right? I know a ton of guys who missed that style of basketball. And because of all the hype, they've started watching the women's game. And oh, look, that is exactly the style of basketball that is being played right now that they miss and they love to watch.
Absolutely. And, the trolls now, as you've said, they're looking at the women's game and they see that it's a physical, fun, it's a strong game. It's a woman's game, right? And I think that in and of itself has drawn a particular crowd of people that sometimes even criticize the men's game for being too soft, or,
Mhm.
they call too many fouls, they protect the offensive game, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't know that until it was promoted in a way that gave them access to the game, right? I mean, playing the games at prime times is important. You now have trolls who have had access and have been able to watch the game and recognize, hey, I actually enjoy this. This is fun, right? I've been mistreating the women and in a lot of ways, just ignorant to the fact that this game can be played in a way that I can enjoy.
I do want to bring it a little bit back to your college days because I want to give you your flowers. Dr. Walker was among the leaders in 3-point percentage and free throw percentage. So you came a long way from just being the kid that was shuffled off to get some rebounds. And she led the team to the program's first ever NCAA Women's National Basketball Tournament. What was it like to break those barriers at your particular school?
It was an amazing experience. Winning that conference title and making it to the NCAA tournament was particularly satisfying because I left Georgia Tech for lots of reasons. A new coach came in, the culture was just not a great fit for me and where I was as a person at the time. So I wanted to do well. I wanted to do well to, one, prove that I could play at that level. I chose not to because of a missed culture fit. So when we went to the tournament and they didn't in the 4 years that I was supposed to be there, that felt really good, right? It's like, okay, well, look, I've left the big ACC. I came down to the smaller ASUN conference, but we're still able to do the same things that we hoped to do when I was in the ACC. So that felt good. I also beat Georgia State, which, being from Atlanta and playing at Georgia Tech, it was nice to be able to beat, a rival school and a school that I had a lot of interest in as a high school player and just, attachment to. So it was nice to beat Georgia State to make it to that tournament. And it's always nice to be able to do something that significant for any institution. I mean, to be able to take an institution to its very first national tournament, NCAA tournament, is a big deal. So it was a lot of fun.
And obviously your legacy is cemented at Stetson. You were in the Hall of Fame, as we mentioned, which must bring you immense pride. Did you ever have designs on playing professionally?
Yeah, so there's an interesting story. I did, and I signed a contract to play in Bonn, Germany, to play professional basketball. I had an agent back in those days, so way back in the days. The money was not great. I wanted to play professional basketball, and I also got recruited, or back then it was called a pre-draft. So the WNBA would do a pre-draft pick where they pick the top 40 players for the draft, and my name was included in that. So I definitely hold that in high regard as well. But ultimately, signing the contract to play in Bonn, Germany came at the same time that I was exploring options as a PhD student. And I applied to some programs and applied for some fellowships. And the day after I signed my contract to play in Bonn, Germany, faxed it over, because that's how long ago it was. You had to fax it over. The next morning, I got my acceptance into the University of Florida, as well as notification that I would be given a fellowship that would substantially help me be able to afford the opportunity to get a PhD. And for me and my family, I was the first and may still be the only person in my family, extended family included, to have a PhD. So that was much more important to me at the time. Honestly, it also paid more. So I was going to get paid more to be a doc student at the University of Florida than I would have gotten paid to play professional basketball in Bonn, Germany.
Those big academic dollars, obviously.
I know, right? Pennies. I was a broke grad student, but still wasn't as broke as I would have been playing professional basketball in Bonn, Germany back in the day.
Right. And what is it like to see how much the landscape has changed for those women who might be faced with a similar choice as you were? Obviously, they're not making as much as they should be, as much as they could be. No one is saying they should be making the millions that the men are making right now. But what is it like as somebody who went through the more lean times, shall we say, to see where this industry has come finally to today?
I don't know. It's just so satisfying and it's exciting because, this is just the beginning, right? I mean, this is just the beginning of the possibilities of where the industry can go. In our book, Dave and I talk a lot about, where women's professional leagues can be and where they are today historically based on where the men's league were today. And if you look at, the WNBA at, let's say, age 28 and compare it to where the NBA was at the age of 28, it's far exceeding where the NBA was as far as selling tickets, as far as being promoted, as far as attention and eyes on the game. And you have to consider the fact that the NBA, when they were 28 years old, they were competing against a far less crowded market. People weren't watching streams of games on Twitch and on, Amazon and X, Twitter, and they were watching it on network TV. Also, they didn't have to compete with just other sports. There are more professional sports now. So the market was far less crowded then, yet the WNBA is still doing better in all regards than the NBA was at the same age.
Yeah, I know that this is a point that you have brought up multiple times. I bring it up whenever I can. Dave brings it up whenever I hear him speak. As not too long ago as the 1980s, the NBA was airing playoff games on tape delay on CBS. And as you said, there weren't a lot of other options of things for people to watch. So why do you think that cognitive dissonance exists between not knowing the history or not processing the history, that the timeline is so much less skewed than it is for women's sports?
I think is exactly what you just said. It's not knowing the history. Folks don't really know. I mean, you think about the way that people consume sports, and it's not necessarily thinking about historical context. There is very little sort of chronological context to how we consume sports. It's in the moment. It's this championship game right now, the excitement, the energy. And then sometimes you don't even have the context of what happened last year, right? I mean, I imagine you could, March Madness 2025, you can ask people who were in the Final Four, who made it to the Sweet 16 the year before, and they're like, oh, I don't really know. They have to really think, right? Because you don't bring that historical context and that chronological context to the conversation. I think also there's a lack of storytelling. And certainly there's folks like you, right? And there's a few other people that we can probably count and that we know very well who are out in the industry who have been telling the story of women's sports in general, but of the women athletes themselves for quite some time. But when we think about mainstream media, they don't do a very good job of telling the stories and giving historical context. You watch an NBA game, you watch the Knicks and you're hearing about Earl the Pearl Monroe, right? They're going back to highlights of when he was playing in the championship, the one championship, that the Knicks have won, and on and on and on. You don't.
Two.
Oh, is it two? Okay, my bad. Again, just the lack of historical context and storytelling is a problem in the women's game. And I know, again, this is no slight to all the folks that are doing the heavy lifting of telling the stories and putting the word out there and giving historical context in chronological order like you, right? It's no slight to that, but so much more needs to be done. And the big networks need to be accountable for authentically telling the stories for the games as they begin to ramp up, their content around women's basketball, but women's sports more generally speaking.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
What's up?
Before you board your flight, where'd we get that incredible gnocchi?
Hold up. Did you just call gnocchi gnocchi?
No. You're at the airport. No way you can hear me.
Actually, with my new Galaxy Buds 3 Pro from Samsung, I can hear everything.
Now boarding.
Gotta go. I'll bring you back some gnocchi.
Tune into what matters using adaptive active noise cancellation with Galaxy AI. Get Buds 3 Pro now at Samsung.com. Galaxy AI features require compatible Samsung Galaxy phone and initial setup via Samsung Wear app.
I do want to get into your book because I loved it. It's very funny.
Yeah, I tell folks, I'm like, we were intentionally sassy. And part of that sassiness came because we were writing the book partly during the pandemic and we had, a little bit more time. We were also frustrated with the trolls because, we were watching folks like you fight the trolls on a daily basis on then Twitter, now X. And it was just frustrating. It's like, why do you have super smart people having to reply and go back and do research, right? I mean, a lot of times you all would be telling a story, sharing whatever content you're sharing, and then you have this troll that comes in. And then I feel like you all would have to stop go do some research to prove to them that their trolling is incorrect. And Dave and I are just like, what? Like, it's a waste of their time and energy. They could be doing all the important work that you all are constantly doing to grow the game. So we're like, let's just put together this book that is, rooted in data, rooted in research that, not only we've conducted, but all of our colleagues in the industry and sport adjacent areas have done on sports and women's sports. Let's pull it all together. Let's put it in one place and let's share it for general population. We didn't write this for academics. We wrote it at a 5th grade level so that anyone who's interested in sport can pull it and use it as a reference to call the trolls, what they are, which is uninformed, sometimes unintelligent acting, annoyances to the people that are trying to grow the game.
On the journalism side, we're all very grateful for you putting up with the trolls in academia to give us this level of research. I want to talk about kind of the biggest myths that you wanted to tackle and that you saw most glaringly and most often come up when it comes to the trolls in women's sports.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people out there that believe men's sports are as successful as they are because they've earned it. They've earned our attention. They've earned our dollars. They've earned our, support for them buying tickets. Like, they've earned it. They are athletic. They're some of the best athletes in the world. Their owners have worked hard for their money. They dedicated, like, they've earned everything that they've gotten. The facilities that they're in, they pay for those facilities. Their owners, that's their hard-earned money. No, sweetheart, it's not.
But Neff, sports are the ultimate meritocracy.
And that's what we try to disprove as well, right? It's like, no, there are a group of men who enjoy very much so watching other men participate in sport, right? They love it. Great. That's okay. We do too. They have a lot of money and they choose to use that money to support other men participating in sport because it's what they love. They will dump, and they have over the years, and we use the Steelers, the Pittsburgh Steelers, as an example of an owner who dumped lots and lots and lots and lots of money into a failing organization, a losing organization with very little people that were interested in watching, couldn't win games, but kept dumping money into it because they just loved to watch those guys play football. And they just knew someday they would be good, right? If we talk about investments in charity, that is absolutely a case of charity. When you have people that aren't even good and not even winning, and you keep dumping money into it and it's not making you any, it's charity, right? At that point, early on, it's not even necessarily an investment because where's the return? There's just lots of lost money. And now we do better as business people. We create models so that even if there's a lot of money being put into it, there are very few people in sport at any level that are putting money into any organization that isn't making money. So all the trolls out there that thinks that they're dumping all this money, the NBA and the owners are dumping all this money into the WNBA and they're not making any money, stop it. No one does that anymore. No one does that in general. But again, getting back to the story, that's an unearned advantage. If you are a team or a league and you had willing investors who dumped money into you, regardless of whether you won or lost, whether you brought fans in or not, whether you even, were good stewards of the money or not, they just kept feeding you money. You had cities who wanted you to stay, so they kept giving you subsidies to use their facilities, and they kept taxing citizens of that particular city or area to pay for the facilities that you needed. That is being subsidized. That is not earned. That is humans making decisions to spend money in ways that aren't even necessarily good business decisions because they like a particular team or they like watching a particular sport. They like this form of entertainment. And that's what the men's leagues have had over and over and over, right? But instead, most women's teams and leagues had to do it the most responsible business way possible. They had to use facilities that were already there, raise money in ways that were responsible. They only grew as much as, their return allowed them to grow. Again, being very good stewards of the finances and slowly building, but still, again, as we've said, with the case of the WNBA, building and growing at a rate much faster than their NBA siblings. So not many average fans of sport understand how much men's sports have been subsidized And I've had people who have read those chapters and they're like enraged. Like, I didn't know this. This isn't fair. And then they also begin to say, like, well, how come the women don't get this? Like, how come we're not, willing to tax folks to get women facilities that they need to play their sports? Like, so they begin to very clearly see the inequities that exist.
You only really convince people about issues on equity, especially in a capitalistic society, when you convince them about the money side of things. So the myth that you are talking about is this myth of women's sports as charity or women's sports as being subsidized, but you lay out very clearly and in a whole lot of detail over several chapters the many ways in which men's sports have historically been subsidized in this country.
And, really quickly, I think my second favorite chapter is where we call out the trolls that believe they don't judge talent equally, right? They say, Michael Jordan is the best player ever because he's, contributed to this many championships, or LeBron James is the best player ever because he did X, Y, and Z. And they sort of stand alone in their own class as being the best ever because of them playing in a particular era or playing with a particular group of people. Whereas with women, they can only be the best ever against every class, every group of person that ever played the sport. And it's like, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Why aren't you using the same criteria to judge women as best in class as you do to judge men as best in class, right? So we sort of call that out as well and say, if we're just judging people based on best in class, then there are a lot of women who are a lot better than a lot of men who have played professional sports if you look at them within their best in class ranking and you don't try to rank them against every single person who have played the sport in all of time.
Yeah, my favorite part of that chapter is somebody whose favorite sport is baseball. And we can go into a whole litany of why girls' baseball is not a thing right now. They are trying to fix it. Power to them for it. My favorite part of that chapter is when you say, oh, the greatest pitcher of all time was actually Jenny Finch.
Yeah. And then again, when you look at the data, prove us wrong. Show me your model that proves us wrong that she's not the best pitcher ever. And I can't imagine there are many people out there that can do that.
When you look at just the kinds of things that women put their bodies through, just not as professional athletes, then being able to exist on this plane, on this athletic plane, what was your inspiration for that particular angle here? We constantly hear from trolls that the reason women's sports are less popular or less marketable is because of biology.
Yeah. Lots of people who have a uterus go through this thing every month, right? Where they go through this cycle. And it's something that women have to deal with. They go through their menstrual cycle. It's a thing. We can talk about it. We're all adults. It's okay. And it impacts everything about how you're able to perform. But women are so good and so resilient and persistent figuring out ways to act as if this thing doesn't happen every month that impacts you, right? It impacts how tired, how much energy you have. You're quite literally losing blood. It impacts your energy. It impacts your appetite. It impacts your hydration. It impacts you in so many biological ways, right? But also there are these social things that impacts what you can wear. Every team has jerseys, home jerseys, away jerseys. Most people who have played sport, who go through a menstrual cycle, understand the anxiety of having to wear white shorts during that time of the month.
I'm thinking of Wimbledon, literally, as you started talking about that. Wimbledon, where you have to wear white.
Why? Right? Why? And again, as adults, women are very resilient. So we've figured out all sorts of ways to get around this anxiety to ensure that we don't have an accident in a way where we are embarrassed publicly, right? But why do we have youth sport kids do it, right? Like they're just navigating this experience very early in their lives. Why do we have white jerseys? It's things as simple as that socially to down to the very much more complicated biological aspects of how it impacts the game and impacts women's ability to perform and all of, again, the interventions that women have to undergo to ensure that they're performing at a level and are impacted as little as possible during, their menstrual cycle. So men don't have to think about that. They don't have this occurrence that happens for days every month that they have to plan their workouts around and their eating schedules around. And, some women lose weight, they gain weight. Like there's all these things that they have to think about. And there are so many sports where your weight is impacted.
I'm thinking of Clarissa Shields and boxing and any sport with a weigh-in.
Exactly. And so those are added anxieties, pressures, people who have a uterus have to think about. And this makes, these folks so much more resilient. It adds another layer. It makes you stronger, right? I mean, quite literally, you're having to perform at a deficit sometimes, whether that deficit is sleep because of your menstrual cycle, whether it's hydration, whether it's, of course, it's blood count, like all of these things influence it. And then you have, folks who go on and actually perform while being pregnant. And that's just a whole nother layer of resilience and strength that, again, men don't have to think about.
Yeah, I believe the comedian Michelle Wolf, she's got a bit where she's like, I truly believe that if men got their periods, we would have a 3-week work month. They'd all have to sync up so they could take the same week off. And
I agree. We don't even talk about it, much less have someone feel comfortable saying, I can't show up to practice today because I'm just not feeling well. It's like, well, push through it. This happens every month. Figure it out. We're not going to, and, again, you have coaches who won't even talk to athletes about it, much less create an inclusive, open space where athletes can feel comfortable sharing in a way that provides them some cover for performance.
There was all of this publicity about Caitlin Clark's rookie contract compared to Victor Wembanyama's. And I think that some of it was overblown because it was not understanding where that money comes from. But at the same time, I think we can agree that the women are underpaid compared to their value. Again, I don't think anybody is saying they are underpaid compared to the men right now. But one of the biggest arguments I hear from trolls is, well, they're being paid their fair market value. They're being paid as little as they are because not as many people watch them. They don't generate the same kind of revenue dollars. What is your kind of top level answer to those who say equal pay is not viable because the revenues are not equal?
The first thing I would say, you've already said it, no one's asking for equal pay. No one. You've had many and I'm going to stick to the WNBA because they're probably the most visible in this conversation right now. Certainly, our national women's team, for soccer has been very visible and very active and pioneers and pushing for equitable resources and support and pay.
And the reason they were asking for equal prize money and the reason that there's equal prize money in women's tennis, one is because of Billie Jean King and Venus Williams, but also because the revenues were comparable and the winning.
Yes. I think folks are asking for equitable pay. And when you get down to it, what is the percentage of revenue that other teams, leagues are getting to pay their players? If it's, 40, 50% in the NBA, or if it's 40, 50% in these other major professional leagues, then why is it 10, 15, 20% in the WNBA? Where is the rest of the money going? I think what folks are asking for is transparency. One, I think asking for transparency is super important in this conversation. Two, I think writing in the next collective bargaining agreement percentages that mirror the percentages of revenue that the players get in other leagues is going to be very, very important. And if it means that the league has to function differently, then function differently, right? I mean, there are ways that you can think about that strategically to ensure that the players are still getting their fair share.
And we're about to see that with, the CBA in the WNBA is up for renegotiation next year. We're about to see this huge infusion of cash from the TV deal that was just struck. Whichever way the ongoing lawsuit on the NBA side lands, we'll let the men deal with that part of it. And that's when we'll start to really see this dynamic kind of shift. Are you optimistic that the women will, from a percentage and a portion perspective, be more fairly paid?
Yeah, I think it's going to jump up significantly. And what's helpful is the level of engagement. There are a lot more people that can speak intelligently about the gender pay gap that are casual fans because of folks like you, let's be honest, right? Like out there spreading the gospel, bringing the facts, bringing the data, bringing the research. I'm spending a lot of time dissecting and interrogating these collective bargaining agreements in ways that make it consumable for the average person. So now you have average folks who aren't deeply embedded in the industry that can speak pretty intelligently about these issues. It's very difficult now to stay purposely obtuse or ignorant about these issues. There's just way too much information out there, and it's at the fingertips of everyone. So I'm very optimistic that the next CBA is going to be very favorable for the athletes. And the fandom that we're seeing, I mean, the arenas are being packed in ways that we've never seen before. There are sellouts after sellout after sellout, right? That shows a level of enthusiasm and interest that I think a lot of owners and a lot of folks on the business side and the management side of the game, they want to capitalize on that. How do you capitalize on that? Well, you got to keep the athletes here, right? A big part of why a lot of the WNBA players go overseas is because they're not getting paid enough. Why am I going to stay here and make, $150,000 when I can go overseas and make $300,000 plus my $150,000? Like, it's not smart wealth building if that's what they're trying to do. So I think, one, there is a lot of effort. There should be a lot of effort at the management level to keep the athletes here. Don't have them go overseas, pay them enough so that they can stay here, especially your top, 3, 4, 5 players. And then also capitalize on the momentum and energy year round. There are tons of months between WNBA seasons where these players can be out talking and doing analytical work for the NBA, engaging with the NCAA tournament, just staying relevant and visible so that when it comes back around to the WNBA season, you now have folks that have been following them and know who they are, and they become household names. That's the way you really build a brand in a way that, can commercialize and grow exponentially.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
What's it like to trade crypto on Kraken? Let's say I'm in a state-of-the-art gym surrounded by powerful-looking machines. Do I head straight for the squat rack? I could, but this gym has options like trainers, fitness pros, spotters to back me up. That's crypto on Kraken. Powerful crypto tools backed by 24/7 support and multi-layered security. Go to kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Interactive Inc., PWI, DBA Kraken. View PWI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
I feel like just as you have a chapter in here that no, Taylor Swift did not introduce women to football, you could also, without having a knock against Caitlin Clark, who was phenomenal and obviously someone who was only positive for the game, but you could also have a chapter in here that's called No, Caitlin Clark is not the reason people have been watching women's basketball, right?
Absolutely.
There's this tension between the obvious bump we are seeing. It is impossible to ignore that Indiana Fever games, when they're in town, the Liberty in my hometown, they have to open up the rest of Barclays Center when the Fever are in town. Other teams have had to move to bigger arenas. There is an obvious Caitlin Clark bump here. With that, we are also seeing pushback from a lot of the people. I don't consider myself one of them, but a lot of the people who have been here for decades and who have been doing the work, and that suddenly you have this infusion of not just new fans, but new commentators, as we talked about. So there's a tension between the desire to grow the game and to capitalize on this momentum and the instinct to gatekeep just a little bit, right? Because some of the stuff that's coming out of these conversations is not the most productive. So where do you kind of fall on the two sides of that tension line?
I think a couple of things. I think 2 things can be true. Caitlin Clark is an amazing player, right? Like, she's fantastic. Ultimately, yes, she's going to be a Hall of Famer. I don't see how she can't be. She's going to be an all-star for years and years and years to come. Like, she's an amazing, I think, honestly, generational player. And also, the game was already growing, right? Like, the revenue was up from last year. The ticket sales were up. The game was growing at an exponential rate, really, since the bubble. So those things are both true. Is there this effect with Caitlin Clark, again, being a generational player and also bringing a different demographic to the game? I mean, we can't ignore the fact that she comes from, a team in an area of the country that is just a totally different demographic when it comes to following the WNBA. The WNBA, in some ways, has been sort of a niche following. It's been a group of people that are rooted in, the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's been mostly situated around big cities, major markets. That's been who the league has been for quite some time.
I mean, I can say it because you're being very kind. The league is Black and gay.
Yes, the league is Black and the league is gay. And also just very gender queer, right? I mean, we wrote a whole article on the gender queerness of the WNBA draft and, how folks are dressing masc and femme, and they're mixing it up in ways that you don't see anywhere else. And then you have Caitlin Clark who comes along, and I'm not speaking to Caitlin Clark as an individual, as a basketball player. I'm speaking to Caitlin Clark as a representation of a part of the country and a group of people that perhaps haven't seen themselves in the WNBA. They like basketball. They love basketball. It's the Midwest. Like, they are basketball folks there, but they haven't seen themselves reflected as often and maybe even in the same ways that they would like to in the WNBA. And now you have Caitlin Clark, who is amazing and getting a lot of shine, rightfully so, and is going to the WNBA. This is an opportunity for all of those folks. And what comes with people always are their ideals about politics and social issues and all of that other stuff, because we see the commentary, right? We see sort of the racialization of whether you're a fan of Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese, for instance, which to me is totally ridiculous. But nonetheless, we see it happening. You have to accept all of that with the growth of the game. If you want to stay a small niche Black gay league, that's fine. You can do that. Like, the most of the country is not Black and gay. So you have to be willing, if you want to grow the league and you want to, create expansion, you have to accept other people in that don't fit maybe the traditional norm of what a WNBA fan would be. And you also have to, expect it to become a microcosm of the society, generally speaking, right? Like, it's going to become what we see in all corners of American society, which is racialization, being politicized in ways that maybe we're uncomfortable with, gendering and gender norms being pushed. Like, we're going to see all of these things manifesting because we've now opened up the league to many, many more people. It's not this niche following of fans and players and industry folks that all know each other and feel comfortable with each other. I'll take it if it means growing the game, because growing the game is good for kids, particularly little girls. I mean, if you see the following behind Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark after a game, and it's all these little girls and little boys, little kids, just like such huge fans of those two athletes in particular. Like, I haven't seen that in a very long time. Yes, after games, there are kids running behind WNBA players, but not the way that they are screaming like it's Beyonce for Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark.
Exactly what you said. It's that we have to keep pointing out more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
That it is good for the game for it to grow and expand in its fandom. It also doesn't mean that it's further legitimizing the game because there are more white and straight fans than there were before. And, I'm constantly saying, like, kind of in a joking way, but not really, actually. True equality is when we're having the same shitty conversations about women's sports that we've had about men.
Also, this is what diversity looks like. True diversity, different people, like having a group of people that are 90% Black and 60% gay, think very similarly, same sort of political ideals, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a very diverse group. Is that a group that's historically underrepresented, doesn't have a voice, that doesn't have access to power and positions and resources? Yes. So for that group to have access to the resources of the WNBA and to have control over those resources for so long is fantastic. But again, if we are being true to diversity, we're going to have to open the door and let different people with different ideals come in, even if they don't believe and think the same way we do, right? It's the very uncomfortable part of when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, is the fact that we have to, at some points relinquish groups that haven't had power, have to relinquish power for the sake of diversity. And I think as long as the people who have been a part of the game for a very long time continue to maintain control over the game and decision-making, and the game stays true to what it's been, with some evolution and changes, of course, then I think we should be open to allowing different folks in.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. And I think that, what you just pointed out with the fact that the marginalized groups that have long been represented in the WNBA, as long as as they can continue to wield power. And because the WNBA is still relatively young, the WNBA can be shaped in an image with an inclusivity to more mainstream fans as well, but without falling into and making some of the same mistakes that men's leagues have made in the last 50 to 100 years. Well, Neff, as I said, I could talk to you for hours. I always love sitting down with you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure we will be calling on you again, especially as the playoffs start and all of that. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add here before I let you go?
No, again, thank you for having me. This is a great conversation. Similar to you, I could talk to you for hours and hours and days about these topics. And I can go on about the book forever as well. But I also want people to buy it and read it. I guess the one thing I want to say about the book is that it's a long book. You don't need to read it from beginning to end. You can cherry pick stories, you can cherry pick chapters. The chapters are pretty easy, quick reads. And you can also just wait until there's that moment where you need to sort of slay a troll and then use the book as a resource to pull out some references and data to slay that troll. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. You're so smart and you know this work in this industry so well that it makes it easy to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation. I encourage you to go out and buy the book, to go see whenever Dave and Neff are talking. They always say extremely smart things. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sportly. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Sportly is an Immigrantly Media production. This episode was produced by Sabia Khan and Shay Yu. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. I'm Kavitha Davidson. Tune back in next week and every week after for more Sportly.